The death of services margins. Tim Cook is stepping down because Apple can no longer afford the cost of being a software company. While the official retirement narrative focuses on a planned leadership transition to John Ternus, the underlying P&L reveals a capital expenditure explosion required to keep Apple Intelligence running. For a decade, services revenue was high-margin profit that investors loved, but the M5 server farm rollout has turned those digits into a massive infrastructure liability. This pivot isn't a victory lap. It is a strategic retreat from a business model that no longer pencils out. And the infrastructure tax is even more punishing than the hardware costs. The infrastructure tax. Every time a user asks an iPhone to summarize a meeting, it triggers a handshake with Apple's custom silicon in a data center. Unlike competitors who use off-the-shelf parts, Apple is building this entire stack from the ground up using its own M5 chips, which carry a heavy depreciation load. We are seeing a fundamental shift where the cost to serve a single customer is rising faster than the hardware replacement cycle. This infrastructure tax is the primary reason why services margins are currently being compressed for the first time in history, which explains why the choice of a hardware specialist for the top job isn't a mistake. The Ternus efficiency play. It seems counterintuitive to appoint a hardware engineer like John Ternus to lead an AI-first company, but the math reveals the strategy. Apple has realized that AI isn't a software problem, it's a thermal and silicon yield problem. To save the bottom line, they need the person who managed the iPhone's internal architecture to find a way to offload more processing back to the device. If Ternus can move just 20% of the current cloud-based inference back to the local chip, he saves the company billions in yearly OpEx. It's a defensive appointment designed to protect the P&L from the runaway costs of the private cloud compute initiative. However, even the best hardware efficiency won't solve the underlying problem of the server electricity bills. This fiscal pressure is forcing the end of the traditional software update model. End of the free update. The era of buying a phone and getting 5 years of free software improvements is ending this year. Internal roadmaps suggest that the upcoming iOS 20 will introduce the first mandatory AI subscription tier for advanced features. This isn't just a new revenue stream. It's a desperate move to decouple software utility from the one-time hardware sale. If you don't pay the monthly fee, your iPhone reverts to a basic communication tool because the cost of running the M5 server backend is too high to provide for free. It is a complete reversal of the strategy that built the iPhone empire, and that shift reveals a much darker reality for the company's long-term valuation. The AI margin trap. Tim Cook's departure signals that Apple has officially hit the wall where hardware margins can no longer subsidize massive cloud operations. By looking at the capital expenditure in the latest filings and the appointment of John Ternus, we see a company desperately trying to re-engineer its way out of an AI margin trap. The legacy of the Cook era was high-margin services sold to a captive hardware audience, but the new Ternus era will be defined by a transition to a recurring utility model where users pay for the compute they consume. This effectively turns the iPhone into a terminal rather than a standalone computer. For investors, the metric that matters now isn't unit sales, but the ratio of on-device versus cloud-based inference. If Ternus fails to shift the compute load back to the pocket, the Apple dividend is the next thing on the chopping block. Watch the second quarter OpEx guidance for 2027. If it doesn't level off, the subscription price hikes will start earlier than expected. Subscribe for more